Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 3, Episode 4 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout the 2023 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Nick, I'm fresh off my vacation. That's why we haven't recorded an episode in a little bit. Basically, had to work a lot of days at work, then took a vacation, so can't really get an episode during that time. But we got one for you guys. We're fully into draft season, dropping this on the weekend of August 26th. It's the last week of preseason. I have a draft tonight, meaning Saturday night when this drops. Nick has 2 drafts, and we're right there.
Yeah, man, we're in the final swing, and football season, it's around the corner. We're about 2 weeks away from the first game of the season. That is crazy, but a long time waiting. Too long waiting.
A little under 2 weeks. 2 weeks would be the Thursday night game, so maybe about 10 days, and drafts are in full swing. Hopefully none of you guys drafted yet, since it's very early and there's a lot of injuries and stuff to talk about. If you have drafted, hopefully you drafted well. If you haven't drafted, we have some tips and tricks and some updates and all that other stuff for you guys to get you prepped for your drafts, whether they're this weekend, next weekend, or after that. It'll be a good show today. We have a lot of news to cover that's happened over the last 10 days or so. Some trade implications, injuries, free agent signings from major running backs, a little bit more clarity when it comes to some of those backfields. And then we're actually going to end the show with another segment that's going to be our fantasy MVPs, breakouts, busts, and sleepers for each position. So 12 players total. So I guess technically 12 players we like and 4 that we each don't like. And me and Nick don't know each other's lists, so we could have some the same, could have some different. And it'll be a lot of players to cover before your draft's coming up. So it'll be a lot of fun, and we're excited to get into that. Before we do get into that, though, I want to give you guys some plugs like I do every time we do this show. If this is your first time listening to us, thank you so much for joining the Primetime Fantasy Podcast. We do this show just about once a week thanks to my crazy work schedule, and Nick is getting ready to become a father, which is very, very exciting. So that's how we're going to roll for this season, but that's okay. When we do have our one episode a week, it's normally going to drop on a Tuesday morning, as we'll be recording on Monday night. We'll recap everything that goes on throughout that week of football. But for the preseason, we're going to give you a lot of draft news and tips and news and all that other fun stuff. You can find our one show a week on all of our streaming audio platforms, including but not limited to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Basically, anywhere where you find an audio podcast, you could find us, the Primetime Fantasy Podcast. If you'd rather listen and watch the show at the same time, go to our YouTube channel, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. If you're not subscribed already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the little bell icon, hit notifications every time we drop an episode. If you're watching this show or any future show, make sure to drop a like on that video. And lastly, share that link with your friends, with your league mates. I know you're giving them a little bit of an advantage that you guys also have, but that's okay because you're helping to grow the Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Also, you can follow and interact with us on all social media platforms. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram is PrimeTimeFFPod. Facebook and YouTube is Primetime Fantasy Podcast. So we're going to start things off with the news. And we had some, I don't want to say breaking news because we're dropping this on a Saturday morning, but breaking news for us as Trey Lance was just traded to the Dallas Cowboys. He was traded for a 4th round pick. That was after the 49ers named Sam Darnold the 2nd string quarterback, Trey Lance the 3rd string. So, Nick, your thoughts on Trey Lance becoming a Cowboy to back up Dak Prescott?
It's an interesting situation. You can't take much of it from a fantasy perspective. I was very high on him last year. I thought he'd be a really good talent coming out, but he has not had a lot of snaps. I saw some news on Cowherd's show from one of his guests that said Trey Lance was at practice and he dropped 4 snaps from under center. Like, he looks really unprepared and unready. He's not gotten enough work. And in that Dallas Cowboy system with that spotlight being brighter than ever, I don't think it's the best fit for him. And I don't see a way where he really takes over Dak and becomes a starter there. He's going to be there for 2 years as a backup. If Dak gets hurt, maybe he gets a chance. And even then, I don't know if that's good enough. So, I mean, Cowboys, it seems like a Jerry Jones move to go trade for Trey Lance at this point and to spend a 4th round pick on him. But I can't take much away from it now. We just got to see if he ever gets another chance to start.
I'm not sure he does get another chance to start. I'm sure that somebody gets injured, whether it's Dak Prescott or somebody else in the future, and we'll see Trey Lance actually appear in an NFL game again. I'm sure that'll happen. But in terms of him being an actual starting quarterback in the NFL, I think his days are done. He was drafted in this system by John Lynch and by Kyle Shanahan. I don't know who made the actual call to make that trade. Maybe it's more of a John Lynch thing. I don't know who has more power over there. But this is a decision made by both of them to trade up for Trey Lance. And he's dealt with injuries throughout his career. Obviously, he's never gotten a real fair shot. I think he was supposed to play in the preseason game. That would be, I think it's tonight, technically Friday night when we are recording. But obviously that won't happen now that he's a member of the Dallas Cowboys. But I'm not sure he ever got a fair shot per se, but the way that I kind of view it is if Kyle Shanahan was willing to say that Sam Darnold was a second string quarterback, I don't think he was saying that just to say it or anything like that. I think if Trey Lance was the better player in practice, I think he would have been named the second string. So this trade is going to go down as one of the worst trade ups in NFL history, I think. And it could have cost the 49ers a Lombardi trophy. They've been in the mix the last couple of years. They could have selected a number of quarterbacks at that number 3 pick. They could have selected another talented player, and they went with Trey Lance. They gambled, and that gamble it was a loss. So that, from an implication of that, it definitely, I think, cost them a Lombardi trophy, possibly. But definitely a miss by the 49ers. So really, really sucks to be them. I'm glad my Seahawks didn't do that. We got Geno, so we're good to go. Next bit of news, we're going to recap a lot of the stuff that happened over the past 10 days that we haven't spoken about yet. So Jonathan Taylor has requested a trade with the Colts. They're honoring that. I believe they've given him until Tuesday, August, I think it's 30th, to actually find a suitable team, which is really interesting because I thought that'd be like the Colts GM calling other teams, but it seems like Taylor's has to do the legwork about this. I believe I've seen that 6 teams have reached out to the Colts, including the Dolphins, Broncos, and Bears, and I think the Colts have rejected the Dolphins' initial offer. So, Nick, thoughts about this? Do you think that Jonathan Taylor gets traded? And if so, where would you like to see him traded?
So if you're talking purely for fantasy, the best fit is going to be the Miami Dolphins. He's going to go into the Mike McDaniel system, which is the exact system that Kyle Shanahan runs. The only frustration is that they're going to cycle in running backs in and out, but there is nobody in that backfield at that Jonathan Taylor level. As a Jets fan, the last thing I want to see is Jonathan Taylor as a Miami Dolphin. I said it on the last episode that now that we're going to go sign Dalvin Cook and Jonathan Taylor will find his way to the Miami Dolphins, it's what I expect to happen. But Taylor did say he's open to staying with the Colts as well. He said, for right now, it seems like he just wants to be paid. He's the same age as me and Nick, 24. Happy birthday to Nick, by the way, just passed last week. That's why he got a nice little vacation down to Florida. But he's a young guy, and running backs don't get paid, and he's in a position where he's the number 1 or number 2 running back in the NFL, and he's the only young superstar running back in the NFL at the moment. So you're really looking at a guy that has the right to ask for 15, 16, 17 mil, which would set the record at the running back position. And he's doing what he's got to do for himself. So we'll see what happens. But I think there's too much uncertainty where if you want to take him in fantasy right now, he's still going in the middle of the second round. I cannot justify that right now, not knowing the certainty of what team he's going to play for. Is he going to be a good fit? Even if he were to stay with the Colts, is he going to sit out a couple of weeks? Is he not going to play? And even if he does play, he's dealing with a leg injury as it is. So there's too many question marks for me around Jonathan Taylor to spend that draft capital on him.
At what point do you draft him? Let's say he's slipping in your draft. Where do you take him?
I feel like if I were at the back end of the draft, so if I have like the 8, 9, 10 in a 10-person league and I see him in the 3rd round, knowing I could get the wraparound and get an early 4th round pick with Taylor, you're probably taking him as your RB2. If you went back-to-back receivers in the 1st and 2nd round, maybe you do take the flyer on him, because if he does get dealt to the Miami Dolphins and you were drafting this weekend, there's a very good shot that you just drafted the RB1 or RB2 in fantasy football. So it's something definitely keep your eye on, of course. But I think that's where I'd be comfortable, back of the 3rd round.
I think the Dolphins is an excellent landing spot, and I actually don't think the running backs will rotate in that offense. If Taylor goes there, I think he'd be a bell cow. I'm sure Raheem Mostert gets a couple looks. Is he still there? I think he is.
He is.
But I think Taylor would be the bell cow there. I think the Bears is another suitable option, and I know that Justin Fields is a running quarterback and probably would take some rushing touchdowns away from him, but I think that would alleviate the pressure off of Justin Fields and would actually help that offense balance out. So I like that landing spot too, but that'd be bad for my guy Rashawn Johnson in Dynasty. As for the Broncos, I don't love the landing spot because I'm a Javonte Williams guy and I still want him to get a fair shot. And that would be them giving up on Javonte Williams. So I'm kind of out on that. I do think he ends up staying with the Colts, though. I don't see a team making a massive move because not only are you trading assets for him, you're then paying him a pretty big contract. So I think he stays a Colt. Dalvin Cook did sign with Nick's New York Jets. Was this after Zeke? I think it was. Or was before?
It was right before Zeke.
Right before. So we'll go Cook first. So Dalvin Cook signed a 1-year contract with the New York Jets. Nick, your thoughts just from a fantasy perspective and how this is going to affect Breece Hall, whose ADP is right now in the 3rd round. I just had a buddy draft him in the 2nd round, and I said that was a not smart decision.
I don't love Breece's ADP right now. I think he's a beyond talented running back, but we've watched too many young running backs that look talented, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins to be specific, go down with leg injuries and it take him a year and a half to recover. He just got cleared off the PUP and is now cleared for contact in practice. If you've been watching Hard Knocks, he is just in the 3rd week of Hard Knocks, which is 2 weeks before the season, now getting reps. There is no way he's going to be 100% for week 1. So Dalvin Cook, through those first 6 very rough weeks of football for the Jets with the toughest opening schedule, I think he's clearly going to be the RB1. They go into the bye week 7, and out of that, I think they'll reassess where Breece is. If
you draft Breece Hall, are you going right for Dalvin Cook? Are you ensuring you get that handcuff, or are you kind of
probably have to? I can't imagine a world where you don't have both, and we don't even know if after week 6 Breece Hall is going to be worth it. For me, I would not draft Breece Hall. I love him. I think he's very talented. I think a year from now, after Dalvin Cook is off the team after this $8 million contract, I think he's going to be a superstar. I think he's going to go really late in drafts because there's going to be so much hesitation. I think I'd smash the button there. Right now, 3rd round ADP, it's absurd. It's absurdly high. He would need to do exactly what he did last year, and this running back room is way too loaded for him to have that opportunity.
I think I'm right there with Nick on everything he just stated. I think the Jets have signed Dalvin Cook, which is a good signing from a football standpoint, not good for a fantasy standpoint. If they're all in on and trying to win a Super Bowl in the next year or two, it's a great move, but not a good move for fantasy football. Ezekiel Elliott has signed a 1-year contract with the New England Patriots. He will be competing with Rhamondre Stevenson, who's currently being drafted as the running back 14. Your thoughts on how this affects Rhamondre Stevenson's fantasy value?
I think Rhamondre, for me, takes a lot bigger step back than I think most people are going to expect.
I almost had him as a running back bust. I didn't do it, but I came really close to busting him.
He's somebody that I thought going into the year was going to have a massive breakout. Last year, he was one of the most consistent running backs in fantasy football. Me and Nick talked about it every week. You know that there's a ceiling there because the Patriots are not going to put up, 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns a game. But he had so much guaranteed workload in the passing game and the running game, and a lot of that's going to be stripped away from Zeke. Zeke is a very, very smart running back. He is the perfect running back for the New England Patriots. He's going to stand back there with Mac and help him read defenses. For me, I love Zeke. I don't think he's the same running back that he was 6 years ago, but he is very smart. He is exactly what Bill Belichick would want in a running back, and he's going to be a phenomenal pass blocker. At the end of the day, Rhamondre, who was probably looking at having a 70% snap share, is probably going to get a lot closer down to that 50%. And I don't think Zeke's going to have enough workload to make him fantasy relevant, but for football purposes, it is an excellent signing by the Patriots. For fantasy purposes, it does make Rhamondre a candidate to be a massive bust.
I think Rhamondre is still going to get a lot of passing work, and I think he'll still be the featured running back, but I think a lot of those goal line touches will be vultured by Ezekiel Elliott, and I think that's where Rhamondre Stevenson will severely suffer. Some unfortunate news. We have a couple injuries to cover. Terry McLaurin injured his toe during Monday Night Football. It was labeled as a toe sprain or turf toe. I'm not sure how much clarity there is on both of those, but it's clearly a toe injury, uncertain for week 1. I don't think this really affects his ADP too much. Maybe you knock him down a round or 2, but he'll be back in the first few weeks. So in my opinion, if you believed in him and you believed in his talent on that offense, then I think you're still drafting him maybe just a round or 2 later, but it's not changing him too much for me.
Yeah, for me, if wherever you like Terry McLaurin, it doesn't change his ADP for me.
I'm still knocking him down a round or 2 because I think his ADP was in like round 4 maybe, and there's a lot of talented receivers. So I think I still would knock him down a round or 2.
Yep.
Similar ADP, Jerry Jeudy has a moderate hamstring injury. He was carted off the field, I believe, during the practice on August 24th. Will be out several weeks. So I'm assuming he's going to miss at least week 1, maybe week 2, and that could linger. And I'm a Jeudy believer. Nick knows that I've been high on him on this show. I thought he's going to have a really big season with Russell Wilson. I'm still of that belief. But instead of drafting in rounds 4 or 5, I'm now probably not looking to him until maybe round 6 or 7-ish. I think I'm targeting other receivers now, knowing that the hamstring injury can linger, and he probably nurses that injury for about a month. So it's a month from now, he's missing the first 2 weeks, and then probably not 100% till October. So I think he could be a very good player for your second half of the season. But your first 4 weeks will probably be without Jeudy. And when he comes back, will probably take a couple weeks to get back to 100%.
Yeah, and Nick and I always say hamstring, groin. It's the 2 injuries that linger for the entire season. They affect you. Even you will go out and play on the field and you will not be 100%. So it's a guy you're now going to have to start in your fantasy lineup or consider benching because of that. For me, I think there's too much talent at the receiver position later in the draft where I would much rather pivot off of Jeudy at this point with the injury concern. I did love the opportunity given the wide receiver 3 and 4 for the team did go down for the year in Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. So maybe it's sudden season again, but yeah, I think the Jeudy injury for me, I don't want to say he's undraftable, but at his ADP, there's too much value to risk that.
Seahawks rookie receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba suffered a wrist injury in the preseason game. I think it was on Saturday. I was on vacation, so I don't even know when the day was, but I think it was Saturday. Did have surgery on the wrist on Monday. It was a minor fracture. Pete Carroll said he could be ready for week 1. He's going to be out a couple weeks. I don't think he plays week 1. I don't think he suits up till maybe week 2 or 3. It might be a little bit slow start to the season. I was kind of off his train in redraft leagues already because you're drafting a wide receiver 3 on his team in like round 7. He was already going before receivers Quentin Johnson and Jordan Addison. So I think this definitely bonks him down to maybe like round 10 or something like that. If you're not in a keeper league or a dynasty league, I'm just not sure what his value is. I know he's super talented, but Tyler Lockett was a top 15 receiver last year. DK Metcalf is still there. I'm not sure what his value was before this injury. After this injury, I don't think I want to attack him until maybe round 10 in a redraft league because you're basically banking on Lockett getting old and losing a step, JSN being super talented and leapfrogging him or DK or one of the receivers getting injured.
Yeah, for me, he's a guy that I think is very talented, but I just don't see the consistent enough fantasy relevancy for me to trust him. Maybe a later round in your best ball draft, because I do think he has the upside and the talent to have a good year.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a week where he puts up 30 points and there's going to be a week where he puts up 1 catch for 10 yards, right? And for me, that's not a guy I want to play any week in my fantasy lineup.
Yep. And as a Seahawks fan, I love the draft pick. Makes the team better. Lockett does have only 1 year left on his contract. So if they don't retain him next year, this is an awesome number 2. So I love the pick, but I just think this year may not be his year. And that's okay. Some slighter good news. Cooper Kupp's hamstring injury. He was on the field at practice on August 23rd, just like he said he would be before the season. He's going to be ready to go to week 1. So don't deviate from drafting Cooper Kupp within your first 5 or 6 picks. He's good to go. Let's do our fantasy football preseason awards. We're going to go through each position. So not defense and kicker. Sorry, guys. Or we're going to go quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and tight end, giving you our MVP, breakout candidate, bust candidate, and sleeper candidates. Let's start off with our MVP. So, Nick, how we are clarifying this to people is this is the player that we think will finish as the position number 1. So quarterback 1, wide receiver 1, etc. When the season does end on January, February, whatever date it is. So quarterback, who is your quarterback MVP for the season?
This guy could qualify as a breakout or as a sleeper because it's a guy that is going a little bit later in your drafts. I'm going with Justin Fields. I think he's going to have a massive breakout season. The one thing I left last season saying is I do not want to forget how dominant he was for a large stretch of the season. And I did some research into it because I really wanted to know what the breakout was. And Matt Eberflus, in an interview, head coach for the Bears, said from week 6 to 7, he spent a lot of time with his offensive coaching staff studying other rushing quarterbacks, Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and they realized how many design runs they really were getting. So from week 1 to 6, the weeks where Justin Fields was not fantasy dominant, he only had 2.5 designed runs per week. After that, for the rest of the season, he was averaging over double that at over 5 designed runs per game. He also averaged 7.1 per carry, which led the NFL, and he averaged over 10 rushing attempts per game, which led the league at quarterback. He also tied Lamar's record for most rushing attempts by a quarterback in a single season. So on the ground, he has been absolutely dominant. This is one of the craziest stats I think I've ever seen for fantasy quarterback, which has entirely shifted my view. Over the last 10 seasons, 13 quarterbacks averaged over 7.5 carries in a single per game per season. I just said Justin Field averaged 10. Of those 13 quarterbacks over that 10-year span, they averaged 22.5 fantasy points per game. The lowest QB finish by any single one of them was the QB5, which was Justin Fields last year. Every single other one was 1-1, 2-2, 1-1, 2-3, 4-1, 1-2. So absolute consistency up there. And year 3 quarterbacks is always the breakout. And you're looking at a guy that just added DJ Moore. I don't love him, but he is a very talented receiver to that receiving core. Josh Allen added Diggs year 3. Jalen Hurts added A.J. Brown year 3. And that rushing upside gave both of them QB1 those years. So Justin Fields, for me, locked in MVP candidate.
There you go. I like the background information. I'm going to keep it short and sweet for all my MVP candidates. I'm going with Jalen Hurts. He finishes the quarterback 3 in 2022. He's currently being drafted as the quarterback 2 in 2023 behind Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes, Allen, and Hurts are all being drafted within picks 20 to 35, depending on your draft and how that will shake out. Here's the thing. I think Jalen Hurts is the best offense in the league. I think it's right up there. The offensive line is one of the best. 2 1,000-yard receivers and aren't getting any. I mean, they're getting a little bit older, but they're still very young. And A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert's a solid tight end. They added Miles Sanders and Rashad Penny. So it's a loaded offense. I don't think the Eagles will have as many blowouts as they did last year. So I think they're going to be in a lot more games. I think they'll win. I think they're still going to win those games in the NFL, but they're going to be in a lot more games. So that will force Hurts to throw more. They also love using the quarterback sneak, especially near the goal line. So I think Hurts has a lot of opportunities to score rushing touchdowns. So with all that said, I think it's going to be a huge year for Jalen Hurts. And did you see the quote? I don't know. I saw it the other day somewhere. I forget where it was. Basically, after the Super Bowl, I forget if it was a player or somebody spoke to him right after the Super Bowl, and he said something like, "We're going to make them pay next year," or something like this. Is like right after it. So I think he's a guy that is determined and ready to go. So I'm going to put my faith in Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense. Your wide receiver MVP for this year, I'm assuming it has to be Davante Adams.
No, it's actually DJ Moore. No, it's Justin Jefferson. Last year, 180 targets, 1,800 yards, nearly double-digit touchdowns. He has the easiest strength of schedule for any wide receiver in the league. Wide receiver 1 last year, easiest schedule in the league. I mean, there's no better combination. I said last year he would absolutely be my 101 over CMC. This year, and the ADP is proving it, that he is the 101. And there is no reason, if you have the first overall pick, that you will not draft him. And if he stays healthy, you have the fantasy MVP.
So I called Justin Jefferson being my fantasy MVP last year in all positions, not just wide receiver, and I nailed that one on the head. I think I wanted him at 5 or 4 in all my leagues, and I think I got him in 1. I'm actually going a little bit different here because I don't like picking the same guy year after year because I feel like it does fluctuate. And I'm going with Jamar Chase, and I'm not sure where you got your schedule research from. All these websites do it differently. Fantasy Pros gives Jamar Chase a 4 out of 5 easiest schedule, and Justin Jefferson a 3 out of 4. So I do like Chase a little bit more when it comes to the schedule standpoint. I also like the offense more. I think there's a lot of mouths to feed in that Vikings offense. They added Jordan Addison with a high pick. TJ Hawkinson was the tight end 2 after they traded for him last year. Alexander Madison's going to have a great year. So Jefferson's still going to get his targets. And I'm not saying you should draft Chase over Jefferson. I'm just saying that when the season ends, I think Jamar Chase ends the wide receiver 1. Because on top of that offense being loaded for the Vikings, I think Joe Burrow is a much better quarterback than Kirk Cousins. And I think Joe Burrow has MVP upside, whereas Kirk Cousins has Offensive Player of the Year upside or something like that. I think Joe Burrow can throw for 50 touchdowns and 5,000 yards and win an MVP. And if he's doing that, he's throwing a lot of those to Jamar Chase. I know they have T. Higgins. I know they have, do they still have Tyler Boyd? I forget if they have Tyler Boyd. I think they do. But I don't think there's anybody else after that that's really competing for targets or offensive share, maybe a little bit of Joe Mixon. But I think the load of that offensive share is going to Jamar Chase, and that offense just runs through the connection of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. So for those reasons, and I think the Bengals are going to be very, very competitive. I think the Vikings, and I love Kirk Cousins, especially after the quarterback show. I think they get blown out in a couple games. They have the 49ers in prime time. They have the Eagles in prime time. That's rough. I don't think the Bengals get blown out, and I think they're within every game. So give me Jamar Chase for my fantasy MVP. Not just for the receivers, but I think he is my overall fantasy MVP this season. Okay. Running backs, who's your fantasy MVP?
I'm going Tony Pollard.
I almost made him it. Yeah, spoiler alert, he's my breakout. But good pick on Tony Pollard. I like Tony Pollard a lot.
Last season, he finished as the RB8 in fantasy in full PPR. And we all know Zeke is gone. We talked about it in the news earlier, and you probably heard about it way earlier than this show. But Zeke is gone. He had a massive snap share and a massive role in this offense. Last year, 12 touchdowns and 900 yards for Zeke. Pollard, 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, 40 catches. On top of that, we got a new offensive coordinator, a guy that Nick knows all too well, and Brian Schottenheimer, who loves to run the ball. Absolutely loves it. Tony Pollard, the most efficient running back in the NFL last year, finished as RB8. And the scariest part about Tony Pollard, he only had a 31% snap share last season. If he gets up to 50%, and keep in mind, this is a team that is not signed in RB2. If you took his stats from last year, paced him out for 50% snap share, that would have put him at 2,000 all-purpose yards, 18 touchdowns in total, 60 catches, and that would have easily put him at the RB1 for last season, above CMC and Josh Jacobs. So you're looking at an absolute fantasy monster and a fantasy stud with all the opportunity in the world. I don't think there's more of a home run pick in the back half of the second round.
I love it a lot. I really do. I almost made him my MVP. But for MVP, for running backs, I'm going with Austin Eckler. He's a guy that I was totally out on last year, and I was wrong. He ended up the running back 2, I believe, behind Josh Jacobs. Back-to-back years with top 3 finishes. At number 2, only behind guys like Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs. I think he's the engine of that offense. And I know Kellen Moore is coming in. And Kellen Moore, who was the running back for Kellen Moore last year? It actually was Tony Pollard. So now Austin Eckler is going into the Tony Pollard role. And I don't think there's anybody behind him who's really competing for targets and rushing attempts. And I think that offense actually runs through Austin Eckler. I do like Herbert a lot. I'll speak about it a little bit later. But I think Eckler's a really important part of this offense. And the thing that makes Eckler special is if they're down in football games, he's still going to be on the field and he's still going to catch a lot of balls. He's not a traditional running back where it's like, okay, we're down 30 points. We got to start throwing it. Well, the targets are going to Austin Eckler. So I don't think you could make a better pick in the first round from running back with Austin Eckler. I'm always anti-McCaffrey. I'm that dude that's always just, he's good, but I don't want to touch him. I think the 2 running backs I want in the first 15 picks if I'm drafting anybody are Austin Eckler and Tony Pollard. And I'll stick to that one throughout the season. For tight end, do we have the same MVP? Like, I'm assuming we do.
I mean, listen, if you don't, I don't know what to tell you. I mean,
it's Travis Kelce, and I'll let's keep it like literally 10 seconds each. I'm willing to draft him in my top 3 picks, so that's how valuable he is.
Personally, I won't draft him that high, but it's 2 quick things for anybody that wants to argue Mark Andrews. Travis Kelce, the last 5 years, his lowest tight end finish was 2. 4 times was the tight end 1. And this past year, he scored 100 more fantasy points over the season than the tight end 2. It's the biggest differentiator in all of fantasy football and the safest pick you can make.
I will say this. I will draft him at 3 or 4 because he's a safe pick, like Nick said, and I don't want to take the risk on McCaffrey. I could take Tyreek Hill. He's there. I could take Cooper Kupp. He's there. But I just think getting a tight end that's going to score. I mean, last year, I'm just going to look at his numbers from last year. He scored 206 total fantasy points. And these receivers did score more. I mean, Justin Jefferson at 240, Devonta Adams 235, Tyreek Hill 220. So it's going to be the difference of 20 to 40 fantasy points from that receiver you would take. But now it's the position that nobody else will have in your lineup. So that is why I do justify taking Travis Kelce within my top 3. Because let's say if I get Travis Kelce and maybe like Amon-Ra St. Brown or somebody, or maybe, Chris Olave, who I really like. I think you're, again, this is another argument, but still. All right, we're fantasy breakout predictions. We're going to start with our quarterback. Who is your quarterback breakout?
I am going with Justin Herbert. I don't know if that's where you were leaning.
We do. I am leaning Herbert. We are both leaning on Herbert. I almost had him as the MVP, but I went with Hurts.
Nick loves to call him a stat sheet stuffer, and
that's my first note. It's all caps. Stat sheet stuffer. That's what he is.
For fantasy football, he is a stat sheet stuffer. He will give you fantasy points. And he's getting Kellen Moore, a guy that with Dak Prescott has put up numerous top 5 and top 10 points per game finishes for the player. So you're looking at all that upside, a ton of talent on offense. I'm expecting Justin Herbert, who has set the record for most passing yards through your first 3 years in the league and second most touchdowns through your first 3 years in the league. I'm expecting Justin Herbert very easily to fill that stat sheet and get some wins behind him. That's not a fantasy stat, but he's going to the playoffs this year, Nick. Justin Herbert and that offense,
but okay.
It's a loaded AFC. Anyway,
it is a loaded AFC.
That team is built for him to succeed, and that offense, the defense has not been. But
no, the defense is built for him to succeed in fantasy too, because they're so bad,
yes,
so they're always giving up a lot of points. So that team is built for Justin Herbert to succeed in fantasy football.
Yep, and listen, he's got all the upside. He's going right now as I believe the QB6 or
QB7,
right after Justin Fields. I mean, the two of them I keep altering. Like, I think whoever gets the right Justin is going to win the fantasy football championship this year. I think both are studs, but Herbert on that offense with that scheme and having those numbers behind him, like he is a must draft. And I think in best ball formats, he does have the upside of finishing as the 1 or the 2. My only fear is one little note I saw on a podcast where it said you're going to have 2 to 3 weeks this season where Justin Herbert's going to have 0 or 1 touchdown purely because Eckler is going to get 3 or 4 near the goal line on the ground. And that
but I'm not knocking him for that. I'm not knocking him for that. If you look at every quarterback on the top list, I could see that happening. Even Mahomes, I could see a Mahomes game where those running backs get like 2 touchdowns, and that they would. Yeah, I wouldn't knock him for that.
I got you. I'm just saying you will have a little bit more robbed opportunity from Eckler, who has gotten over 20 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. So, but again, me and Nick agree he's a perfect candidate for breakout.
I think he could finish as the quarterback 1, and you're drafting him in rounds like 5 to 6. And those top quarterbacks are going to go early. You're gonna miss on Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts early. And then once you see Lamar go, I think is when you look to target either Justin Fields or Justin Herbert. I think those are the guys you want to target. My other note on Justin Herbert is, to me, he is just Kirk Cousins, except he won't lose the big games like 20-3. He'll lose them like 20-17. So he'll get you the stats.
No. He'll lose them to you 35-32 because his defense won't stop the other team. But
and he also doesn't put up enough points in the second half, but luckily that doesn't account against his fantasy points. But yes, that is my breakout for quarterback. I'm going to take the reins here for the breakout wide receiver because I'm all in on this guy. I've said it a couple times in the show. Chris Olave, all in. I have him on 2 of my teams already as a keeper. I have 2 drafts left, and I'm looking to get him in both of those if I can. One of them I have the 8th pick out of 12, so I probably won't get him, but that's okay. He was wide receiver 22 last year. He dealt with an injury and was out, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. He also dealt with the quarterback play of Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton. Now it's Derek Carr. And the receiver for Derek Carr last year was Devontae Adams, who finished as the wide receiver 2 in fantasy. He finished above Tyreek Hill, even if he had a down year for Devontae Adams. So Derek Carr, he's a stat sheet stuffer, just like Justin Herbert is. Gets a lot of points to his wide receiver, and I just don't see another receiver that's even going to gobble up targets behind him. I know Kamara is there, but a little bit older. He'll still have a good year. Michael Thomas is a guy we don't even know what we're going to get out of Michael Thomas. I think I know what I'm getting out of Chris Olave. I think I'm getting 12 to 1,400 yards. I think I'm getting 10 plus touchdowns. I think we're getting an absolute beast in his year 2. I'm so excited to get Olave everywhere where I can in all my leagues. I think this is the guy who's really going to, if he stays healthy, I know it's all goes unhealthy, but I think he's a guy you want to target in every single one of your leagues. If you're getting Olave, Amon-Ra, or Garrett Wilson in the second round, I give you an A+. That's the end of it.
I agree.
So who is your wide receiver breakout candidate?
I'm going with Jahan Dotson. He was drafted last, and I like
that one. I almost went as a sleeper for him, but I didn't.
I love what you said about. I actually had him as a sleeper, and I moved him over to the breakout because it was a different sleeper I wanted. But I love that you mentioned Chris Olave, because a lot of the comparisons for Jahan Dotson fall right in line with Chris Olave. You're looking at two guys that dealt with quarterback controversy and too much rotation in their first year. Drafted in the middle of this, early to middle of the first round, just 1 year ago, both going into their second year in the league. If you pace out both of their seasons with with taking out the injury over the course of 16 games, their stats are nearly identical, and you're getting a guy in Jahan Dotson right now in the first pick of the 8th round, in ESPN, the later 9th round. Jahan Dotson last year outpaced Terry McLaurin, excluding the injuries, in all the stats of targets, yards, and touchdowns. Right now, Sam Howell has looked really good in the preseason. I'm not saying he's going to be great, but he's looked good enough for a guy in Dotson who's had a great camp to break out. I also saw another one of my new favorite stats, which I hate reading to Nick and to the viewers of this podcast that are in my other leagues, but second-year wide receivers over the last 10 years drafted after the 4th round.
I love them.
Drafted after the 4th round, second-year wide receivers, last 10 years, 85% of them outperform their ADP.
I love it. I love
It's a
targeting second
monumental
wide
step.
receivers. I love
We
it.
all know, but the only thing that screws you is the 3 out of 20 that are sophomore slumps. The odds say that he will have the second-year breakout, and every single wide receiver second year tends to do it. It's the guys that typically win you your fantasy championship. So for me, I'm easily going to be targeting him in all my leagues.
We're going to go to running backs now. I'll take this one first, since I did mention Tony Pollard is going to be my breakout. Second round ADP. So if you're going receiver in the first round, maybe you have a late round pick, maybe you have like 8 or 9 or something, and you want to grab like an AJ Brown or a Stephon Diggs, I think Tony Pollard's the perfect guy to grab on the wrap if you want a running back early. No Ezekiel Elliott this year, and they made no effort to go get a second running back. I know they drafted Deuce Vaughn, but that's okay. It doesn't worry me. I think Jerry Jones is all in on him. I think Mike McCarthy's all in on him, and for all the reasons that Nick stated why he could be the MVP. I'm all in on Tony Pollard and Austin Eckler is the only 2 running backs I want within the first 15 picks. I do like Derrick Henry as well. But yeah, I don't want Saquon. I don't really want McCaffrey. These are the 2 that I will go for in the first 15. So who is your breakout candidate with the running backs?
You mentioned Eckler and you mentioned Tony Pollard as the only 2 you like in the top 15. There is one more guy that I love that I think he's going, and I don't think it's fair to say as a rookie you can break out, but Bijan Robinson is set up for more success.
No, it's fair. I think it's fair.
And just about every rookie running back that's come out that early. The guys that have gone that early in their first year, CMC, Eckler, Saquon Barkley, Todd Gurley, Leonard Fournette, all of those top 5 guys have finished as a top 5 running back in their rookie campaign. Bijan Robinson right now going off the board as the RB4. He was actually the guy I was debating going Tony Pollard with as my fantasy MVP. You're looking at a guy who's going to play with Arthur Smith's system, who had Derrick Henry for 2 years, rushed the ball over 300 times. The only difference is he has elite pass catching ability. They've already shown a willingness to line him up in the slot and on the outside and throw him the ball in the preseason. So Bijan Robinson, absolute monster campaign incoming. I'm expecting 250 plus touches on the ground and probably looking at 80 targets. So in your full PPR formats, he has all that upside. The only differentiator is I don't think he has the potential on that offense to put up as many touchdowns as a guy like Tony Pollard. But right now, he is screaming top 5 fantasy finish. I think he's one of the more guaranteed guys going in the top 5.
I think you're right there. So let's go to tight end, and I'll go back to you going first, as I normally have you as the analyst on the show. So who's your tight end breakout for this season?
I'm going with Darren Waller. It's the re-breakout of Darren Waller.
The re-breakout of Darren Waller. He's like 31 years old with a re-breakout. Listen, he's in that tight end, like kind of mid-range dead zone. Either going with Kittle, Waller, Goddard. There's a couple others there, Pitts. So, I mean, yeah, make a case for him.
Every report at a Giants camp has been that Darren Waller has been the best pass catcher. There is no good pass catcher on that Giants outside.
That's the contrary part of that report, is that there's not a lot of competition. So, yes, he is the best by default.
But that is exactly what you want for fantasy. That's
right. You're right. He's going to get the volume. So you're right.
There's not a lot of guys. There's not a lot of tight ends, and we show it every single year that after pretty much your top 3, 4, 5 tight ends, you're not punting the position, but you are trying to get the guy with all the upside that has the workload. You're really looking for 10 fantasy points per game. Darren Waller, in a Giants camp, they had to bench him because Daniel Jones wasn't throwing the ball to the other receivers enough. Like, there was genuinely concern that he was going to just be laser focused. And for defenses, that might be difficult. But Daniel Jones is a guy that's going to throw 25 times a game. If Darren Waller is going to get 25 to 30% of that target share, you're looking at a guy getting 6, 7, 8 targets a game. 5 targets is the number you want from your tight end if you're going that late in the draft. And you're looking for touchdown upside every single week. Darren Waller is great. After the catch, he's very athletic, and he's going to have the workload. The touchdown upside, it's not going to always be there week to week, but he's a guy that can go break off a 40-yard catch, and not a lot of tight ends can do that. For me, I have him finishing as the tight end 3 on the season, right behind Andrews and Kelsey. I think he's lined up to be right where he was a couple years ago, and I think next year he's going to be very overdrafted because outside of Kelsey, no tight end repeats as the top 3.
He's a very polarizing player in fantasy because I either see him as a breakout or a bust everywhere. So there you go. I'm going with David Njoku, and here's why. Last year, only 5 teams had a tight end target percentage of 26% or greater. The Browns were in that with David Njoku. He could be the number 2 option in that offense. No, Elijah Moore is there and Donovan Peoples-Jones, but behind Amari Cooper, I don't think there is a solid number 2 option. I think David Njoku can insert himself as that number 2 pass catching option. Last year, he also set career highs in receptions. I think was 58. A little lower in yards than his career high. I think it was like 10 yards away from setting a career high in that and tied his career high with 4 touchdowns. I think he could get over 700 yards. I think he could get you 8 touchdowns. I think he could get a lot of red zone looks from Deshaun Watson. We'll see what kind of form Watson really returns to. But I think the Browns will be down in more games than they're up. I think they're going to compete in a lot of games. I think we'll see a bit more of that Deshaun Watson that we saw a couple of years ago, since he now has it a year and a half really to get back to football form. So I think Njoku could be a guy that Deshaun Watson could rely on, especially in games where Amari Cooper is not performing, which I think are in cold weather games or away games. There's certain games that Amari Cooper doesn't perform in. I forget what it is, but that's when the
away games.
Away games. There you go. So 8 games with David Njoku could really break out for you. Okay, so let's go to our bust predictions. So, who is your bust for quarterback?
I'm gonna go with Dakota Prescott. I do not love
him. He was your guy for a couple of years. He really did.
Yeah, I've always really liked him, and Kellen Moore has been a big reason why the Cowboys. The defense has always been horrendous, and they've always been putting up a lot of points to fight fire with fire. But their defense has gotten really good. They're really talented. I think they're going to hold a lot of people to a lot less points than they have in the past. I'm expecting them to allow 17 points per game. And with that said, Schottenheimer is known for managing the clock and being a game manager. His goal is going to be get Tony Pollard the ball, manage the game, short passes. And you were looking at a team with I think too much aging talent on the outside. They brought in Brandon Cooks. They got Michael Gallup coming off a major injury. They had T.Y. Hilton for a little bit, who I think has now stepped away. But you got CeeDee Lamb. They let Dalton Schultz walk, and you got Tony Pollard, who will be efficient on the ground. So I think you're looking at less options. You're looking at a run-first offense. And for a guy currently going as the 9th or 10th quarterback in your draft, if I have to take Dak Prescott there, I'd rather punt the position and go draft a Geno Smith, a Daniel Jones, or someone a little bit further down the board who will probably finish within 5 or 10 points or above them and would have much higher floor. I really do think that this team is going to switch a lot, and I think Mike McCarthy is going to be the official play caller for the team, but I think we're looking at a game managing situation from Dak Prescott, which I think he can do a lot better, and I think the Cowboys as a team will be a lot better, but that's all the reason why they're not going to pivot back to trying to put up 35 to 40 points a game.
So my bust is a guy that Nick busted last year. I'm going with Josh Allen, and I still think Josh Allen has a fine year. I'm not saying he's going to bust, but if you're taking Josh Allen at pick 28, you're taking him over a lot of talented receivers, a lot of talented running backs. You're taking him probably right behind Patrick Mahomes. And if I'm taking a quarterback early, like if Nick said to me, you have to take a quarterback early, I'm taking Jalen Hurts. I'm taking Jalen Hurts over Josh Allen. I'm taking him over Patrick Mahomes.
I agree.
And out of those 3, I would rank them Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, and Allen. I don't think Allen has as many yards as Mahomes. I think his rushing yards and touchdowns regress, so he's not going to match up well with Hurts, won't match up well with Mahomes. And then right behind him, a round or two later, is Lamar Jackson. Then 2 rounds later is Justin Fields and Justin Herbert. And then there's Trevor Lawrence. And there's so much other talent a round or two later. I don't see the gap being super high. If Allen's here, Herbert can be right there. So can Justin Fields. So I can't justify drafting any of those 3 quarterbacks really high. But if I had to draft one, it would be Jalen Hurts. I don't think that Josh Allen finishes as the quarterback 1. I don't think he finishes in the top 3, so I can't draft him as a top 3. And I didn't even mention Joe Burrow. I would take Joe Burrow over Josh Allen. I see no reason not to. Burrow's a big guy, and he gets a couple rushing touchdowns a year. He has some legs, and I think he's going to throw for more yards and more touchdowns. So why would I justify Josh Allen at 28 when I could get Joe Burrow at probably 35 or 40? So, yeah, I mean, Allen's going to have a lot of tough defenses to face. That Miami defense isn't terrible. The Jets defense is the best in the league, probably. The Patriots defense is solid. Like, I think there's a lot of negatives to Josh Allen when you account for his ADP. And I think the reason why people are drafting him so high is because of the name. And that's just kind of where we're going with Josh Allen. I kind of can't believe that the bar between Allen and Burrow is really that. It's not super far, but Joe Burrow's being drafted as the quarterback 5 and Josh Allen the quarterback 3.
I think it's just the rushing. I think it's the rushing floor that keeps him there.
I think so too, but he's not a Lamar Jackson or a Jalen Hurts or a Justin Fields. He's just a big dude that can lumber around, and they're not really designing runs like they are a fast, shifty quarterback. So that's why he's my bust, at least. On to receivers. Who is your wide receiver bust?
I've said it a couple times on the pod. I'm not a fan of this guy. I don't understand his ADP at the moment, and he's going way too high for a guy with too many question marks. It's Drake London. I know we just talked about us loving our wide receivers.
We have the same one.
We both talked about not liking we love our year 2 wide receivers with their upside of breaking out. But Drake London is in I don't want to say crowded offense, but there's a pass catcher in Kyle Pitts. Bijan
He's
Robinson,
the third option, I think.
I agree with that. And you're looking at not a lot of proven at quarterback. You're looking, I think it's going to be a very run first team. I think Drake London's going to be super inconsistent. I don't know when you're going to trust playing him. And I think
he had a lot of drops last year. I feel like I remember him dropping a lot of balls.
And for a guy, I think he's going in the 5th or 6th round right now. You're really banking on your wide receiver 2 or your week to week flex option at that ADP having so much inconsistency. And I see a lot more weeks where Drake London will lose you your matchup than go out there and win you a fantasy matchup. I think there's guys 2 rounds later, just to say a few, Marquise Hollywood Brown, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, Mike Evans. Those are 4 guys right now.
Chris Godwin's right around there. Terry Jeudy, Terry McLaurin.
You're looking at a lot of guys that have the higher floor and the ceiling, no ceiling for the most part later in that draft. So for me, low ceiling, low floor. For me, I cannot justify this ADP. I think it's the one that sticks out like a sore thumb to me.
He's being drafted as the wide receiver 23, and in a position that's so deep and so talented, I can't do it in rounds 5 or 6. I can't draft him over Mike Evans, who's had 8 seasons with 1,000 yards. I don't care who the quarterback is. I could suit up at quarterback, and Mike Evans can say, "Throw me the damn ball," and I'll throw him the ball, and he'll still catch a bunch of balls. I just can't do it. I can't. Okay, bust for running back. Since I just let you go for the receiver and we have the same one, I'll go with running back. I have my guy Kenneth Walker, and I'm kind of out on him from fantasy standpoint, and I've spoke about it on the show and a couple of reasons why. He's already nursed a couple injuries in his career. He missed the first 3 games last year with, I think, a hernia. I could be wrong on that. I think he's at a hernia. I think he's at a hamstring. I think he's at a toe. I could be wrong, but I know he's had a couple different injuries. I think this last one he just had in training camp was groin. So there's already an injury factor with him. He does not catch a lot of balls. Also want to remember, I know that the Seahawks did draft him early, but they were starting Rashad Penny. And if Penny didn't, I think he tore his ACL. It was a leg injury. But if Penny doesn't get hurt, what is Kenneth Walker's role last year? We don't know. So on top of all that, the Seahawks then draft Zach Charbonnet. He's a bigger back. He's going to catch balls. He's going to get the goal line work. And Charbonnet's ADP is 5 rounds later. So I think I'd rather take the chance on Charbonnet than Kenneth Walker. Again, I can't justify drafting him in around 5 or 6 when there's so much talent on the board. Nick just listed the receivers, but if you look at a running back in that dead zone, there's a lot of them. Alexander Madison's a running back 1. James Conner's a running back 1. David Montgomery just got paid, and they chose to pay him. Remember that they chose to pay David Montgomery. They're going to use him. J.K. Dobbins, if you're a believer in that train. Kamara is going to be around there. James Cook. Like, there's so many names that you could draft later, a round or 2 later, and Kenneth Walker's not the guy that I want to take a chance on.
I agree with you.
Who do you got?
I'm going with Saquon Barkley. I busted.
I love it. Yes, I love it. I love it. I'm so anti-Saquon every year.
Saquon, and
I feel bad. I feel bad knocking on him every year. I'm sure he's a good dude. He wants his money. Like, I appreciate it. Like, he probably works his butt off, and he's had a couple rough years injury wise. He's super talented.
He's a real good dude.
He's super talented. So I'll say this: I do want him to succeed, but yes, I will not draft him in the first round of my fantasy team, knowing that there's so much talent out there that I can trust, and I don't trust Saquon Barkley.
I will not root against him like I root against Deshaun Watson, right? Like, there's levels to this. I do not root against Saquon Barkley, but I'm taking the name out. Saquon Barkley has had 1 year since a major injury where he put up a full season, and halfway through the season last year, he fell off of a cliff from an efficiency standpoint. He heated up in the playoffs again, and he looked good in the NFL playoffs for football, but his efficiency fell so far off a cliff, and he put together a full healthy season for the first time in 3 seasons. I do not love his ADP. Right now, he is going off the board in the back half of your first round. Me and Nick listed a number of running backs that we love going in the second round. So you're telling me right now you could take Saquon Barkley at the 8th overall pick. That's roughly where he's going. After that, just that running back, you got guys like Bijan Robinson, Tony Pollard, Ezekiel, Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, superstar studs, all guys that have proven it for multiple years that they can put up these numbers. And obviously not Bijan being a rookie, but guys that have consistently proven it. You've had the 1 year from Saquon. The only thing justifying his ADP is you're looking at a guy that'll probably have 70 targets this year. And does that create a safe floor for him? Absolutely. But you also have a quarterback, Vanilla Vic. Daniel Jones is going to run. Danny Dimes, Vanilla Vic. It's a great combo. There's no way I'm going to take him in the back half of my first round, knowing I can take a superstar like Stephon Diggs, knowing that Cooper Kupp or Tyreek Hill might have fell to me.
AJ Brown is 1 pick behind him, and I'm like, I am drooling over getting AJ Brown in a league. Like, I want 100%. To. Like, here's the thing that sucks. In our league, I have picked 3. I don't know what's going to happen with that yet. In my work league, I'm not sure what pick I have. We were repicking, but I did have 2. In my 12-man league that'll be drafting on Saturday night. So tonight, if you're listening on a Saturday, I might get AJ Brown. And in my other league, I don't know yet, but I want to have him on a team. I'm all in on AJ Brown. Okay. Tight end, who's your bust?
I'm going with George Kittle.
We have the same one. I knew we'd have the same one here.
I love the guy, but Kyle Shanahan, he needs 2 things. 1, a quarterback that passes the ball efficiently and does not screw up brutally, which is why they got rid of Trey Lance and why they like Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold, who are 2 pure pocket passers that are just going to hit the short stuff that they need. And 2, you need someone to hold the offensive line. And George Kittle is the best blocking tight end probably in the history of the National Football League. Nobody loves to block more than George Kittle, and he loves it because he loves being that guy and that good for his for his real football team. But for fantasy football purposes, right now he's going off the board at the tight end 4. There's no way he's going to finish that high when you have so many weapons between CMC. Brandon Ayuk from week 6 on last year was a top 5 fantasy football receiver. Deebo Samuel, who is going to have work on the ground and in the air. Elijah Mitchell. I know we don't talk about Elijah Mitchell because CMC's there. If you told me Elijah Mitchell this year puts up 700 yards on the ground because of his workload, nobody's going to be surprised because of the cycle that Shanahan's going to run. Nothing makes sense for George Kittle to put together consistent week-to-week play. Will he give you the 1 game this year where he gets 30 points and wins you that week and you're like, that justified the pick? Sure, but that's what you expect from Kyle Pitts. The 2 games. But George Kittle also does not provide the safe floor or the athleticism, and he's also aging. He has suffered from injury year after year after year, And right now, if you take him at this ADP, I promise you it was a waste of a pick. There is no way he's going to justify a top 4 finish. He's not been able to put together a healthy season. He is a phenomenal blocker. Everything points towards being a great football player that can't stay healthy and can't finish for fantasy for you. And for me, that takes him off the draft board when you got to take him in the 4th or 5th round.
Yep. I don't have the exact numbers here, but Kittle's best stats last year were the games that Deebo Samuel missed. And Brock Purdy had a great connection with him. But once Deebo came back in, the stats dipped. You don't root against injuries, but if you draft Kittle without Deebo, in the back of your mind, you almost have to say, I don't want Deebo on the field. Again, you never root against injuries, but that's what you're banking on if you draft Kittle, is you're banking on Deebo missing time because he's not going to be productive with Deebo on the field. On top of everything Nick said that I echo, I think the 49ers have pretty bad game scripts. And if they play a style of football where they want to run the ball, control the clock, play defense, they can score up to 30 points every game because they have an excellent offense. But with Brock Purdy at quarterback, with the way that they like to play games, I don't see them just throwing the ball a ton. I think they control the clock and play safe football. So, yeah, I'm kind of out on Kittle. If I don't get Travis Kelce, I think I'm kind of out on tight end until the very, very later part of the draft. I like TJ Hockenson a lot, but he's getting drafted a round or two early than I'd like. Okay, let's go to our sleepers, and let's talk about TJ Hockenson. I'm going to start with the quarterbacks and Kirk Cousins. I watched that quarterback show on Netflix. I think a lot of people did. They all really love Kirk Cousins. If the NFL is rigged, the Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl this year. I'm set with that one. The Vikings are a fan-friendly team and a team everybody will root for. I'm all in on the Vikings being an NFL is rigged Super Bowl winner one of these years. But aside from that, Kirk Cousins being drafted as a quarterback 13 behind guys like Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, Daniel Jones, etc. He's a quarterback 7 in 2022. He's at 4,000 yards in 7 of his last 8 seasons, stat sheet stuffer. He's had 29-plus touchdowns in 5 of his last 8 seasons, stat sheet stuffer. They went out of their way to trade for TJ Hockenson, and TJ Hockenson became the tight end 2 after being traded to the Minnesota Vikings last year. They then went out of their way to draft Jordan Addison in the first round of the NFL draft. Second-year coach with Kevin O'Connell, so he's had a year to really get in that system and to kind of tweak things. So I think all signs point to Kirk Cousins having a very effective year from a statistical standpoint. Does he win the primetime games? I don't know. Maybe. You might have a couple rough games for them. I'll be honest with you. You might want to draft another quarterback pretty soon after. But if you get to a point where you lose out on the top 6 quarterbacks and you don't want to draft Dak Prescott or Tua, etc., and Kirk is right there, take a shot at him. He's going to produce stats. Like, I love Geno Smith. I'm a Seahawks fan. I'm wearing the shirt, but I'm not sure that Geno goes out and does what he does last year. I'd rather have Kirk Cousins over Geno. I'd rather have Kirk Cousins over Russell Wilson. I'd rather have Kirk Cousins over, one of the rookie quarterbacks. So it doesn't produce rushing upside, but everything else I think he kind of checks the boxes with. So I think he is the true definition of a sleeper going off the board at quarterback 13.
I am going to go with a guy in my division that I don't like to justify, but Tua Tagovailoa. A guy that
pick when he's playing.
Yeah, listen, it all comes down to if Tua's out on the field this year, and you don't really want to work injuries into the fantasy football equation. There is a shot he misses a couple games this year, and there is a real shot that he misses significant time because of how bad the offensive line has looked. But when Tua was out there last year, he was the QB 10 in points per game. You got to keep in mind, he only played 8 full games, and the rest of the games where he started, he played 13 last year. 5 of them, he went down with injury. That's a very significant number and a reason why that average goes down. But in the games where he played the entire course of the game, 100% snap share, he finished in points per game, he averaged the 5th most points per game for the quarterback position. He's in a very explosive offense with 2 elite weapons on the outside of him, and we know that they've been looking to add a Jonathan Taylor, another elite running back to that room. They've also made some calls on Josh Jacobs, who the Raiders are saying are unavailable. But we know that the plan is to get another superstar on that offense and give Tua another weapon. This team feels like they can go win a Super Bowl right now. And for a guy going off the board as the QB 13 in fantasy, he's pretty much locked and loaded. If he's playing, he's going to outperform the 13th quarterback week to week to week to week. So if you draft him, you're locking him into your lineup. The only way you're not playing him is if he got hurt. And if he plays the whole course of the season, he's practically locked in to be a top 10 quarterback. And I know there's a lot of talent at that QB position this year with those first 7 guys specifically. But after that, if you punt on the position, Tua is the guy that you have to draft.
All right, let's go to running backs. Who is your running backs? I'm sorry, let's do receiver because receivers what we've been doing first. So who's your wide receiver sleeper for 2023?
I don't want to call him a sleeper because he's screaming at you like, why the hell am I falling all the way down here? It's Mike Evans. There is no justification for Mike Evans going as late as he is in drafts. I know last year I owned him in 2 leagues. It was frustrating week to week watching him not put up consistent enough performances.
That's who he is.
Still finished as a very good receiver for your team, just not as the 2nd or 3rd round pick that you drafted him to be last year. And now he has Baker Mayfield. Nick knows no one hates Baker on this planet more than this guy in this chair right now. But Baker Mayfield, as much as I
don't know, Uncle Colin's out there in California.
Oh yeah, it's a 2-man race. It's a 2-man race with me and Uncle Colin. Over the last 2 years, as much as I dislike Baker, he has the 6th most completions over 20 yards. Mike Evans is a deep ball receiver. We know Baker Mayfield has no problem saying, fuck it, somebody down there somewhere, and it's always going to be Mike Evans that he's targeting on that deep route. Even if he's not efficient, you are going to get a 3rd and long where you got sacked and he's going to chuck the ball up to Mike Evans 1 to 2 times per game. And Mike Evans is still that guy. He's 29 years old. He's not over that 31, 32 hump where receivers really start to deteriorate. He still has that athletic prowess in him. And what makes me believe a guy that has gotten over 1,000 yards every season of his career is going to take that step back. We watched Jameis Winston, and I know Jameis has an arm and was just as bad. His lowlights were as high as his highlights. But same thing can be said for Baker. He gets those balls deep down the field. I don't love him personally, but Mike Evans, if you're going to take him, and at his ADP right now, you're taking him to be your first bench player. You're not even taking him to be a week-to-week starter at his ADP. He's a slam dunk, home run, no doubt pick for a guy that if in a league like me and Nick's, where in the 6th or 7th round, you can keep him as your last pick of the draft. We're talking about a guy that could very easily finish as a top 15 receiver, and me and Nick next year are going to be like, why the hell didn't we take him at that late ADP and keep him for the following year?
And also, don't forget, the bye weeks will start, and then the trade deadline comes. You may not have to play him until he's traded to a different team.
100%. And the other option, there was a report that the Jets are looking for another receiver. We just watched Corey Davis retire. Nick didn't want it in the news because it's irrelevant, and I agree with that.
It is irrelevant.
But Mike Evans is a guy that could potentially be Aaron Rodgers' number 1 or number 2 receiver by the end of the year, or could be Patrick Mahomes' wide receiver 1 at the end of the year, right? Like, you're talking about a superstar that's been over 1,000 yards going this lane in the draft. To me, it screams slam dunk, home run, must draft. I mean, like, there's no other pick, and I'm willing to take him around early just because he's screaming out, like, take me at this ADP. If you're in a home league, he's going to get drafted earlier because everybody knows the name. And that's part of the, like, he's not a sleeper because everybody knows he's going too late, but it's still too late. Like, there's got to be some adjustment to his ADP.
I've, over the offseason, my hype about this player has gone up. And I'm hoping to nab him in my drafts before the hype really jumps up. But I think last night solidified that probably won't happen. I'm all in on George Pickens, year 2 wide receiver. A lot of people are all in on Kenny Pickett being a breakout this year, both for fantasy and for regular drafts. And if that does happen, who is Kenny Pickett's favorite target? I think it's George Pickens. I think we saw it last year where George Pickens kind of lapped Deontay Johnson. Now, Pickens is being drafted in round 6 to 8 as the wide receiver 36. Deontay Johnson is being drafted as the wide receiver 26. Last year, Pickens had 4 touchdowns. Deontay Johnson had 0. Deontay Johnson had, I think, 30 more receptions and I think 50 more yards. But I'm not worried about that because I think Pickens is more talented. He's younger. I think he has a better rapport with Kenny Pickett. So last year he finished So this year he's being drafted as wide receiver 36. Last year Pickens finished wide receiver 31 and Deontay Johnson finished wide receiver 46. I'm attacking it. I am. And I think the Steelers are going to be in a lot of football games this year. They also improved the offensive line. So I like Najee Harris. I think the Steelers are one of those teams that can compete for a wild card spot. The AFC, as I've been saying to Nick, to my coworkers, the friends, the AFC comes down to who's healthy. It's going to be the Chiefs, it's going to be the Bengals, and then who's healthy. I'm sticking to that one. I think those are your two top dogs in the AFC. Then after that, who's healthy? Are the Jets healthy? They could get a playoff spot. Are the Dolphins healthy? They could get a playoff spot. Are the Chargers like who is healthy? They're getting the playoff spot. And I think the Steelers, if they're healthy, they are very well coached. They have talent across the board, and they've made the right decisions, especially on draft day. So give me a team that I think competes. Give me a second-year player and a good connection with his quarterback. I love Kenny Pickett, and I don't have him on a league yet. I hope I do. He's one of those guys that I really hope I do. It could end up being a Devontae Smith situation where I was all in on Devontae Smith last year on this podcast and got him in 0 leagues, and he ended up being the wide receiver 8 after being drafted as the wide receiver like 40 or something like that.
Yeah.
All right, your wide receiver sleeper.
We move over to the running back.
Oh, you did that already. Okay.
Yeah.
Your running back sleeper.
I've been pounding the desk about this guy. It's Alexander Mattison. He's still going way too late in drafts right now. Going off the board is the RB21, which would be your first RB3 if everybody took 2.
Makes no sense. He's the one player makes no sense. I don't want to cut you off, but I'm sorry if I am. If you look at the running backs he's being drafted by, James Conner had a down year last year and is on a bad offense. David Montgomery will be competing with Jahmyr Gibbs. Kenneth Walker competing with Zach Charbonnet. I'm trying to think of other guys. Javonte Williams, the injury, and obviously they are looking for another back. The guys, if he's around, make no sense to me because his situation is so much better than all those guys. They did not draft. I think they did draft a running back, but they're not looking to play that running back per se. They didn't sign another running back. They chose to let go of Dalvin Cook for this guy. It just makes no sense where his ADP is, and I think he gets drafted higher in most leagues than his ADP. But I'll let you continue now.
I agree with that, and I do think when the time comes to your draft and you get to the RB21, Alexander Mattison will be drafted above that in 99% of leagues, but he's still going way too late. For me and Nick have said there last year and for years prior, there were 3 handcuff running backs that you had to own. Tony Pollard, massive breakout. Kareem Hunt, who as the second running back on his team could still be played week to week, and Alexander Mattison. And last year, Mattison proved exactly why you need to have him on your team. Dalvin Cook missed 4 games last year. In those 4 games, Alexander Mattison averaged 21 fantasy points per game. They have not signed a second running back to back him up yet. We know that they had one talk with Kareem Hunt, but they have not brought in anybody else. So you're now talking about a guy who could be looking at 70% of a snap share, is going to have close to 300 carries this season, will have some sort of role in the passing game, probably closer to 30 catches than 50, but still some sort of role. And a guy that he might not be the most efficient, but it's the same thing that we said about Najee Harris 2 years ago and last year, where, maybe that first round and second round ADP will not pay off, but 350, 400 touches, no matter what, is good enough week to week for him to be a fantasy solid player. And for me, Mattison should finish as a mid RB2 or a low end RB1 at the highest. So everything points to a check mark for a big year for a guy finally getting his opportunity. I still don't understand the too late ADP, and me and Nick both agree on that one.
So for me, it's a player I've kind of toyed with, and it's James Cook. And here's why. They got rid of Devin Singletary, so there goes a little bit of competition. I know they did sign Damian Harris and what's his name? Former Vikings and St. Latavius Murray, both to 1-year deals. It doesn't really worry me as much. I think James Cook's biggest competition is Josh Allen. I don't think that's a lot of competition. Ken Dorsey, offensive coordinator, called him an every down back. I think he has the ability to catch balls. They drafted him high 2 years ago. We know he had a little bit of a rough rookie campaign, but this is a guy you're drafting around 9 or 8. This is going to be your running back. If you're running 0 running back, maybe you're running back 2. If not, it's probably your running back 3. So he's most likely sitting on your bench. I think he's worth a shot. It's either that or like a tight end you probably don't have in a couple weeks, or a receiver who will never play. I think he's worth a shot on a high-powered offense that'll probably be up in a lot of games, that will want to run the ball at times, and I think he'll get a lot of opportunities to do that. So I think he is worth drafting to ensure that. On the tight end, our last sleeper, our last player, who do you got as your sleeper tight end?
I'm going with Dallas Goedert. He's been a guy I've always kind of liked, never loved, and he still falls into that category for me, but he's been so consistent at the tight end position. Last year, he missed some time, but in the games that he played, he averaged the 5th most points per game. Right now, he's going off the board as the tight end 7, and most importantly, he's had a 90% snap share ever since Zach Ertz had left the team via the trade. And in the time where the Eagles have passed the ball and have had passing plays where their quarterback drops into the pocket, he has blocked on less than 20% of those snaps. So we talked earlier about a guy like George Kittle who's always blocking because of how efficient he is. You're looking at a guy in Dallas Goedert who does not block. This is a little off of the Dallas Goedert conversation, but one of my favorite stats that I think I've ever seen, and I love my fun stats. I think we're going to need a segment for Nick's fun stat of the day, but my guy, Mark Andrews, in his entire career in drop back passing plays, he has blocked a total of 5 times in his career. That is absurdly low and kind of proves exactly why you need a tight end that can pass catch for fantasy, where Mark Andrews is consistently 2, 3, 4, and 1 where he topped Kelsey one year. But Dallas Goedert, he's not pass blocking. He's got the snap share that locked in ever since Zach Ertz left, and he averaged the 5th most fantasy points per game at the tight end position. So a bunch of check marks. He's going off at the tight end 7. He should have a top 5 finish if he could stay healthy. So for me, that's more than a reason to draft him that late.
I'm going with everybody's favorite tight end sleeper. Going to butcher the name, Chigoziem Okonowu. I'm calling him Chig. I think that's the nickname he goes by. Last season, he was ranked 2nd amongst tight ends with a 27.1 target per route, only behind Kyle Pitts. He had 4+ targets in 6 of his last 7 games. In those last 7 games, he was the tight end 7 in fantasy football during his rookie season. I think he could be the second receiving option in this offense behind DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think Treylon Burks is somebody to really worry about. He's hurt for the first couple of weeks anyway. But I think he could be a nice safety blanket for Ryan Tannehill. There's no Austin Hooper there anymore, so really doesn't have a lot of competition. I think they're all in on him. I know it's going to be a run-first team with Derrick Henry, so there are things that are working against him, but that's why he's a sleeper and a guy you'd be drafting post-round 10 if you really need a tight end. Whether it's maybe you're drafting him and another tight end just to play the matchups each week. I think he's a solid one that you can go for late in your drafts. So that is our show for this week. I think we gave you a lot of good information, talked about a lot of players, and hopefully this helped you guys out with your drafts. If you have them coming up this weekend, next weekend, you got about 2 weeks and get ready for those drafts. So if you enjoyed the show and you're listening on an audio streaming platform like iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. We'd appreciate that. If you're watching on YouTube and you enjoyed it, please drop a like on this video. We'd appreciate that as well. Share those links with your friends, with your league mates to help grow the Primetime Fantasy Podcast throughout the season. You could let us know that you enjoyed the show by going to our social media channels, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram as PrimeTimeFFPod, Facebook, YouTube as Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. Best of luck in your drafts if you're drafting this weekend. And we'll talk to you guys soon. And we might have a little surprise for you. We might have a live show coming up during our draft in about a week. It'll be Monday, September 4th.
It'll be Labor Day.
We might do a live draft. We'll see how that day goes. We'll let you know probably a couple days before. But best luck in your drafts. And let's get ready to draft. Let's get ready to win this season. And let's enjoy fantasy football.